So let's get started. If you're from Virginia or the Carolinas, you might recognize this controversial leaf. It's from a tobacco plant. The radical idea we'll see during today's show is how a life sciences company is licensing a process invented in a university lab more than 20 years ago, and along with their own proprietary knowledge, is using genetic material grown in tobacco plants, of all things, to create a treatment for ovarian cancer, which affects nearly 25,000 U.S. women every year, according to the Centers of Disease Control. Chlorogen is a St. Louis company at the initial stages of a remarkable journey in which they'll successfully navigating several business in the eye of the storm issues. And even if you're not a life sciences company, you'll gain new insights about weathering 3 knowledge age business issues on today's shows. First, in a segment we'll call Making Dollars from Change, or Monetizing Proprietary Knowledge, you'll learn how proprietary processes unto themselves have value you may have never considered before for your business. It's a classic, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole story, but with a knowledge age twist that every business leader should consider. In today's second segment, Venture Capital for Intellectual Capital, we'll talk with an early stage venture capitalist with some sound advice for any company requiring capital to fund new ideas, whether they're from traditional manufacturers or new biosciences companies. And finally, in the third segment, the more you know, the more it's worth, we'll see how business valuation is changing and the precautions every business should take to protect and how to value its intellectual capital, which is the new fuel for the knowledge age. But first, let's get the background on how Chlorogen may hold the key for that demon tobacco to turn over its new leaf. Hopefully turn significant return for its investors. So sit back and watch and see what it means for your company on this segment of Business in the Eye of the Storm.
Chlorogen Incorporated is a life sciences company using a patented process to deploy tobacco plants as small factories to produce therapeutic proteins used to develop a drug for the treatment of ovarian cancer. Until Chlorogen's process, the lead protein could not be produced in the quantities needed for human testing. Dr. Dave Duncan is the president and CEO of Chlorogen.
We're kind of the new wave of technology. We do it through the chloroplast of the cell. And you think about a chloroplast, what is that? That is where photosynthesis takes place. That's the energy mechanism in the cell. And there's a lot of chloroplasts. And there's a lot of DNA in those chloroplasts. And you multiply all that out, and you get a lot more opportunities to express the DNA as a protein versus nuclear transformation. So that all got kicked off by Dr. Henry Daniell and Dr. Paul Malaga at 2 different universities back in the 80s. And we're the commercial enterprise around that chloroplast type of inserting genes into the chloroplast of the cell. That's kind of how it starts, is with a university and a tech transfer office of a university looking to monetize their invention. And so they will do licenses, and they do this quite often, quite freely. That in effect monetize their discoveries. The professors and employees of their university have a discovery and they'll want to monetize that. How that works then is they find someone willing to invest, willing to put money in and take the risk, and we refer to this as risk capital. And that is what has happened here and happens all over the country with billions of dollars every year. There is an investment by someone willing to take a risk that this technology will someday pay off. And it'll pay off, and when it does, there will be royalties back to those universities.
In the knowledge age, there will be more investments in intangible assets like proprietary knowledge versus the hard assets of the industrial and technology ages. Tom Meltzer is the former chairman of the St. Louis branch of the Federal Reserve and co-founder of Rivervest Venture Partners, specializing in the financing of emerging technology opportunities.
It's very important for us when we're looking at a knowledge-based company like that, at a life science company, to understand what they own in their patents, and often you have to make judgments before the patents have actually become effective, but they're filed. And you have to make judgments about what do they own, what is their art, and can they practice that art without infringing somebody else's patents? In other words, do they have the freedom to operate? And at the end of the day, that's the only asset these companies have.
I think what's applicable is, if you think about this in a broad way, what we're doing is we're going out into the capital markets to find access to financing. We happen to be going to the only capital market that's really interested in us right now, and that's the venture capital. They take on the higher risk technologies, the higher risk companies. Someone that has revenue, we don't have revenue, but someone that has, and a company that has revenue and has income has a broader array of capital market access. So they'll go to the private equity markets. They can even go to the financial institutions that we all think about, and the banks and the bond markets. But in essence, we're all going outside for external sources of money, and we're all going to the capital markets. And it happens for us that about the only avenue is we can't get funding from banks. We can't really get funding from private equity at this point, but we can get funding from the venture capitals. Those other avenues are open to those companies in the manufacturing sector that have actually making a product and are in commerce.
You've just heard how Chlorogen's reliance on venture capital to create a marketable drug. But what if you're not a startup life sciences company, but a dynamic mid-market company with a spectrum of potential growth strategies with as much upside or as much potential risk as Chlorogen? How does your market position and the mix of growth strategies fit into the knowledge age? Well, today there is a greater acceptability for the funding of intangible ideas, and today there's also more financial markets with more capital who are willing to take on more risk. These changes provide an opportunity for mid-market companies to deploy a funding strategy that may be less obvious and therefore traditionally overlooked, giving managers of innovative companies the opportunity to choose the risk-reward balance that works best for them. There are 3 steps to this process to frame your company's thinking about your position. To see them, go to www.businessintheeyeofthestorm.com and click on the Featured Topics button. Engage in an online conversation with an expert, or examine another strategic exercise for business leaders who want to examine their market position with the UHY Advisors Innovation Productivity Matrix.